the Honourable Member for Sarnia-Lambton.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. And it's a pleasure to rise today and to speak on Bill C-57, the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Deal. And I'll be sharing my time with the Honourable Member from Calgary-Nose Hill. First of all, I want to start off by saying unequivocally the Conservatives support Ukraine. I want to say it again because there's been a lot of misinformation from the other side. Conservatives stand with and unequivocally support Ukraine, as we always have. In 1991, it was a Conservative government that was the first Western country to recognize Ukraine's independence. And it was under the Stephen Harper government that the initial Canada-Ukraine free trade agreement was negotiated. And so, you know, we already have a free trade agreement. I think the discussion today needs to be about what should be in the agreement and what should not be in the agreement. Now, I also want to share with the House my personal support for Ukraine. When the war first happened and people were having to flee, this government failed to send planes to rescue them. They created a bureaucratic 2-month process to get your papers to get here. I hired extra staff in my office and worked with local organizations and people that were on the ground in Ukraine to bring 200 families to Sarnia-Lambton, to find sponsor homes for them, to get jobs for them and English training services. So unequivocally, I support Ukraine. But let's look at the Liberal record. Initially, when President Zelenskyy said, please do not provide this turbine to Russia so that they can fuel and fund their war machine, the Liberals sent the turbine. They allowed Canada to supply detonators for mines that are being used to blow up Ukrainians. How in any way is that support? The Ukrainians have asked Canada for our LNG to replace the Russian fuels that they were using. And Canada refused. That's something that ought to be in this agreement, and it's not. And the Liberals, although they promised the surface-to-air missiles over a year ago, they still haven't been delivered. So clearly, there's a problem in terms of the Liberals listening to what Ukraine is asking for, because none of that is in here. Instead, they decided to put carbon tax language into this agreement. Now, the Conservatives have negotiated, over 50 trade deals. All of the trade deals that have ever been negotiated with Canada have never contained any of that language. And why was it necessary, since Ukraine already has a carbon pricing mechanism on industrial emissions? It's minor. But certainly, Ukrainians who are trying to recover and win a war, the last thing they're going to need is to be put under the same regime that Canadians are suffering under, that has driven up the cost of food, home heating, all of these things. Ukrainians definitely don't need that. And so I want to highlight a couple of other things that are ongoing. Of course, we have always supported the Operation Ukraine to provide aid, but there's more that Canada can do. Ukraine is asking for munitions from Canada, but the Liberals voted against the Conservative motion to send those and are still delaying sending the kinds of munitions that would actually help Ukraine to win this war. I think when you talk about the record of the Liberals, it's just clear that they want to seem to be updating a trade agreement that already exists without actually putting into it the things that the partners would need. I think the real crux of the matter here, Madam Speaker, is that they also refuse to fix the bill. So when the bill went to committee, it was clear from the member from Dufferin-Caledon, he brought numerous amendments that would have helped this act. First of all, we agreed that if they removed the references to carbon pricing and carbon leakage, that the Conservatives would willingly support this agreement. But the government has refused, even though, like I said, Ukraine already has made their decisions about what they're going to do about carbon tax. And so they are a sovereign nation. They have every right to do that. We shouldn't be putting that into a trade agreement. He also brought an amendment that would provide energy trade and nuclear technology like small modular reactors. Now, this is really important. There's an energy crisis and an energy opportunity going on in Europe right now. And every time they come and ask for our help, Canadians who want to help are just surprised to see the Liberals refuse. Germany wanted to give us $58 billion for our LNG. They said there's no business case for that. So Australia took that deal. And the Netherlands wanted to do a deal with us. And we said there's no business case. So Qatar took that deal. Japan wanted to do. I mean, the list goes on and on of opportunities where we've had the wherewithal to really help and have refused, Madam Speaker. And so, you know, all of these amendments that were brought have been turned down. And I don't know why they wouldn't accept one that talks about nuclear technology. That's a very green technology. It should fit in with what the Liberals are proposing to do. The other amendment that they voted against, and this is really troubling, is an amendment to increase defense supplies to donate to Ukraine. Ukraine is running out of munitions. And we have a lot of munitions that are not currently being used across the country that could be repurposed and sent. But the Liberals voted against this amendment, as did the NDP. It's the NDP and the Liberals standing together to not support Ukraine. And so I really don't understand, Madam Speaker, how, you know, they can stand up every day and not know their own record on not giving Ukraine what they need. The other thing that they voted against, another troubling thing, is there was an amendment to have the Business Development Bank of Canada support projects in Ukraine to develop their own munitions manufacturing capacity. I think this is, a concrete way that Canada could have helped. You know, we're already sending billions to everyone in the world. Who needs it more than Ukraine, that's currently at war with Russia, which is a threat to the whole Western world? So I have no idea why the Liberals won't give the Ukrainians what they're asking for. And that is really the discussion that we're having today. We already have a free trade agreement. We're going to continue to do trade with Ukraine. Conservatives are dedicated in supporting Ukraine, but we are not going to force a carbon tax regime to make things worse than they already are. We'll let Ukraine deal with whatever they want to put in place with their sovereignty. But meanwhile, we want to give them what they're asking for. And they're asking for Canada to help with LNG. They're asking Canada to help with munitions. They're asking Canada to help with financial aid to support projects to rebuild their nation. These are the kinds of things that should be in a free trade agreement between Canada and the Ukraine if we want to modernize the one that's already there. But it's not. And we continue to see, in my riding, difficulties that the Ukrainians are having in trying to rescue other people that are coming. As the ravages of war are advancing, there are still people that want to come, and the Liberals haven't made this process any easier. And I think if they really want to help Ukrainians, they should recognize that there's a huge need. There's a need in other areas where we could be of help. You know, we have a lot of armored ambulances, for example, and we're not using them. We've replaced them. But the other ones are still there. They need an oil change, maybe, and a new set of tires. Those are the kinds of things that we could be sending to Ukraine. They're hauling people around in, broken down cars because they've got no ambulances left. So these are the kinds of things, Madam Speaker, that I think we should be thinking about. I see that I'm being called to wrap it up, so I'll wrap it up where I started. Conservatives unconditionally support Ukraine. We stand with Ukraine. That was clear from 1991 when we recognized their independence. It was clear when President Zelenskyy was here asking for our help, and my colleague Candace Bergen stood in this place and unequivocally said we support Ukraine. The current leader has said we unequivocally support Ukraine. That is the record. That is the correction of the misinformation and disinformation from the members opposite. And Madam Speaker, we need to help Ukraine. Thank you.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary of the Government House Leader.
Speaker, the member that just spoke is wrong. President Zelenskyy comes to Canada last September and he came to Canada to sign a trade agreement. That's why, at a time of war, comes to Canada to sign a trade agreement. He's asking parliamentarians here, all of us, to support the Canada-Ukraine trade agreement. So is the Canadian Congress, Ukrainian Congress in Canada. So is the 1.3 million people of Ukrainian heritage and others. They want all members of all political parties to get behind and vote in favor of this legislation. Why is members of the Conservative Party chosen to abandon Ukraine when Ukraine is asking for the support of this legislation?
Honourable member for Sarnia-Lambton.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker, and the member opposite is wrong. We absolutely support Ukraine, and we have absolutely said that if the language about carbon pricing is removed from this agreement, we would sign on, and we'd like to add a few more things that Ukraine is actually asking for, like the LNG, like munitions, like some of the ambulances that we have and extra equipment, things that were taken and seized that belong to Russia would be an advantage to them. So there's a lot of things that we would like to do, but certainly we don't want to inflict a carbon tax that's already doubling costs in Canada and causing unaffordability.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Drummond. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I want to thank my colleague for Sarnia-Lambton for her speech. One thing to start. In her speech, she said that the Conservatives unconditionally support Ukraine, and it's not true that they're against Ukraine. It's a bit false, at least the perception, and perception is quite strong, Madam Speaker. The perception is they're voting against this bill simply because it talks about the carbon tax or carbon pricing, and this goes against their current ideology. This is a shame because it goes against the good that this could do. On another point, there is a fight against corruption in Ukraine, and they have committed to strongly fight corruption, and it's in the treaty. And there is no mechanism to ensure cooperation. My colleague from Santia-Saint-Abbot passed the only amendment that went through in committee, and it will help us fight together against corruption because it's a major issue during the post-war reconstruction. I'd like to know the opposition to the bill, C-57. Does my colleague think that this is not important? The Honourable Member for Sarnia-Lambton. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to thank my colleague for that question. I don't think that the Liberal government can fix anything when it comes to corruption. They are experts on that subject, that is, on corruption. There are a number of agreements that we have signed with other countries. There is no carbon tax in those other agreements. Why is there mention here in this agreement that exists between Canada and Ukraine? I don't know. But if the carbon tax is eliminated, we will support it. Thank you.
And comments, the Honourable Member for North Island Powell River.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the member for her intervention. You know, I have a fairly sizable Ukraine community within my riding, and I want to give a special shout out to Stefan and Slav, who've worked very closely with me around all the ways that they're doing incredible work to send money back to Ukraine, to help people who are settling from Ukraine, and many other functions. The concern here is that they understand that Ukraine is a sovereign nation, and one of the things that's been very clear in asking Canadians is to step forward and provide support, and this trade agreement is a fundamental caveat of that ask. And I'm just wondering if the member does not hear from her Ukraine community how concerned they are that the Conservatives are simply not supporting this when they don't see any attachment to a carbon tax. It just doesn't make sense to a sovereign nation. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Sarnia-Lambton in 20 seconds.
Oh, thank you, Madam Speaker. What I would say is I meet regularly with the many Ukrainians who have come. I want to thank the Save Ukraine Sarnia-Lambton group and people like Dr. Cassandra Taylor who have provided supports and welcomed our family of Ukrainians in. They certainly know unequivocally I support and unequivocally the Conservative Party supports. And I would remind everyone that we already have a trade agreement and that Ukraine already has
And we have to resume debate.